So those are points to which we can return subsequent to Rich telling us about his experience in relation to the film.
All right. So, Rich, go ahead then.
Okay, Len. The subject of this other film is something that I have to tell you straight out I don't often talk about for lots of reasons. One, I think it's a very dangerous property to possess, and I never had possession of this other film. I want to make that clear. On the forum, we refer to that film as the other film, but looking back at it, I might say that film is perhaps the official film of the JFK assassination, in that it portrays quite exactly what the closest eyewitnesses describe. And the extant Zapruder film actually does not. And just thinking back over the years now, I think the only probative value of the extant film is to point out there was a massive and intricate cover-up associated with the assassination. But as far as using it as a time clock reference for the assassination and all that other stuff we've heard for decades, it's not of very much value. That's my opinion. Well, let me just say this, that for people that were fairly new to the case, or perhaps people that didn't get interested in the case until Oliver Stone came out with his movie in 1991, we basically went almost 30 years without having access to the Zapruder film. We had heard all about it. We knew of its existence from the very day that it happened, but it was snatched up rather quickly by Time Life, and it was never treated as a piece of evidence, meaning that we do not have a firm, watertight timeline or time of possession of that film. For example, we know that Zapruder took his film, and the first thing he did was go to a TV station, appeared on camera for a brief interview. And the reason he went there was the hope that the TV station could develop his film. But his film was Kodachrome 2, which required a copyrighted process that Kodak controlled very tightly, so you would have had to take it to a Kodak lab, which was his second stop. He went to the Kodak lab in Dallas, and they processed the film. Then he wanted some copies made, and he went to Jameson, and they made copies of the film. Now, from that point until the next morning, Saturday morning, when Zapruder claimed that Time Life took possession of the film, we don't know for sure where that film went. Zapruder claimed that he kept it in his safe in his office, but there's no proof of what happened to that film from time that it was viewed at Jameson until the next morning. The Assassinations Record Review Board, in testimony that they took from a few individuals, indicates that the film may have taken quite a trip Friday night. It, in fact, may have gone to the top-secret Kodak facility in Rochester, New York, that was nicknamed Hawkeye Works, and then from there, it ended up at the CIA facility, NPIC, the National Photographic Interpretation Center. So, as a piece of evidence, maybe one of the most key pieces of evidence in the case, the Zapruder film really wasn't handled as a piece of evidence, and I think any skilled attorney could have shot down its value if it had ever been introduced into court, because we just don't know what happened to that film from Friday afternoon to Saturday morning. But then the intent was that that film never be shown to the public. And the reason for that was out of concern for the privacy of the Kennedy family. Of course, the actual concern is that they didn't want the general public seeing graphically what happened that afternoon. And except in a few limited cases most researchers had no access to that film for almost 30 years. Now, the film was tightly controlled by Time Life, and up until about 1975, when Robert Groden went on Good Night America, hosted by Geraldo Rivera, and they broadcast the film, although, interestingly, they did not broadcast the best quality version of the Zapruder film that night. But that was the first time that the general public en masse had a chance to view the Zapruder film. From that point until, I'd say, about the time that Oliver Stone's movie came out, it was difficult to acquire a copy of the film to study. Penn Jones copied the film and made it available. The film made its rounds around college campuses. It's rumored that when Jim Garrison subpoenaed the film from Time Life, he made it rather available for somebody to make copies of it, and those copies floated around for a while. But in general, it's very difficult to see the Zapruder film until about 1990-91, when the film then became available on videotape and on CD-ROMs and other formats. So prior to that time, everybody that was interested in the case heard about the Zapruder film and actually had read descriptions of the Zapruder film, some of them accurate, some of them not, but had not had the opportunity to look at it. Now, subsequent to around 1991, we not only had the opportunity to possess the film in a variety of formats, but we had the ability to play it in slow motion. We had the ability to look at it frame by frame and really do some study on it, and that's when we became the most familiar with those frames. However, it had been rumored that there was another film taken of the assassination, and that it was being shown on college campuses. The origin of the film is really unknown, but long about 1974, I think, in 1975, I was taking courses working on my degree in political science at the University of Maryland. I was still in the United States Air Force at the time, and the University of Maryland had a program where you could take courses on Saturday and Sunday. In fact, you could carry a full load just by going all day Saturday and all day Sunday. So I was doing that, and coincidentally, University of Maryland is in College Park, Maryland, where today the National Archives Annex is located. And I'm not suggesting that had anything to do with that selection of that city, but just a statement of fact. Here's how it first happened. We would go to class for a couple of hours in the morning, and then there would be a break for lunch, and then we would return and we would go to class all afternoon. And I would do that every Sunday. In between the two classes, we could go to lunch or just hang out or whatever. And on one occasion, some people at the university said that there was a film of the Kennedy assassination for anybody that would be interested in seeing it. Nobody said it was a Zapruder film, although some people just assumed that it was. So at the break, at the lunch break, those of us that were interested in the Kennedy assassination went into an empty classroom, and there was a projector set up. And the best of my recollection, it was a 16-millimeter projector, not an 8-millimeter projector. And they ran the film, and we were all aghast at what we saw. We asked the gentleman with the film if he would run it again, which he did. Now, we did not have the ability to step through the frames one by one, or to do the kind of scrutiny that we've done with the extant film today. And what I saw on that first occasion was a series of events in Dealey Plaza that matched what the closest eyewitnesses had described for several years. And so I wasn't too surprised at that point. It was not an easy film to watch in that it contains a lot of gory detail. After that incident, then we had the showing of the film on Good Night America with Geraldo Rivera. And as I watched it that night, I thought, this isn't the same film. And Geraldo Rivera doing a lead-in to that, I remember him using the term, now this is heavy. This is the murder of a president. So I assumed that even though they did that disclaimer, that perhaps they had done something to the film to remove some of the graphic detail. But the film, quite obviously, was not the film that I saw. It's the extant film that we have today on all of our computers and so forth. About a year later, again at the campus, the main campus of the University of Maryland, we had the opportunity to view it again. And they ran the film, and this time, having seen the extant film finally, they ran this other film, and my reaction was as if somebody just punched me in the stomach, because it was quite clear that this was not the Zapruder film, nor was the Zapruder film an accurate depiction of the events of 11/22/63. And it was a very, very uneasy feeling to watch that. So I think we watched that more than twice on that occasion. And I found out some years later, when we were beginning to put together the JFK Research Forum and everything, that we were able to locate about a half dozen researchers that had seen the same film at various times, in various places, and no two of us were ever together viewing that film. So that film made its rounds, and one individual saw it in France, another individual saw it in Oxon Hill, Maryland, which is another suburb outside of D.C. Another person saw it in New York City, and we put together our recollections of the film, and then we compared them, and it was quite obvious that the six of us had seen the same film. Now, I took a stab at describing that film, and it is included in the book, The Great Zapruder Film Hoax, that Jim edited. It appears as Appendix E, and I guess it's really a good thing that we pounded a stake in the ground and said, okay, here are my recollections at this point, because now, several years later, we're relying on my little gray cells to remember the details of that film. So having it written down in 2003 turns out to be a good thing, because I'm finding as I go along, sometimes my memory is not the best tool that I have for doing research. But in that Appendix E to the great Zapruder film hoax, we have a description of the film. And I'll kind of give it to you in a nutshell. If you have any questions after I'm done, please feel free to ask, and I'll answer them the best that I can. First of all, the film is a better quality film than the extant Zapruder film. Now, I was into photography big time in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I had my own dark room, and I knew all about film types and photographic terms and so forth. This other film was much better quality film. I would say that it was a professional quality film. It had great color rendition. Whereas if you look at the extant Zapruder film, you know, there are at least 6 versions of that floating around, provided to us at one point or another by Robert Groden. Some are better quality than the others, but none of them are the quality of this other film. I mean, it had great color rendition and was a better film all around. The film started with the limousine on Houston Street as it approached the turn onto Elm Street. At that point, William Greer, the driver of the limo, had difficulty maneuvering that 110-degree turn onto Elm Street. And it appeared that at first he wasn't targeting the car to go down Elm Street, but rather that he was targeting the service road in front of the Texas School Book Depository. And then he began to struggle as he realized that that wasn't where he was supposed to go, and he maneuvered to try and get the limousine back toward the center lane of Elm Street. And you can see that in this film. I mean, the entire turn is included in the film, whereas in the extant Zapruder film, even though Zapruder said once he started filming, he didn't stop until the limo had gone by, the extant Zapruder film does not show the turn on to Elm Street. So the Greer maneuvers the heavy limousine onto Elm Street, trying as he was progressing down the street to get it to the center lane. And just about the time that he got to the point where the gunshots occurred, there was a lot of activity on the right-hand side on the curb. The first thing he noticed was the guy that we call the Umbrella Man was furiously pumping the umbrella up and down. He wasn't just holding an open umbrella as we've been fed by a number of other researchers. He was pumping the umbrella up and down. There was a lot of movement. The next thing was there was an individual that for many years we called the accomplice. And in later years, we called him the Cuban because he's a dark-complected man. He was wearing a cap, and in at least one still photograph, we can see that in his jacket, he had a radio device. I believe, although I know a couple of researchers don't agree, but I believe that that gentleman was Felipe Vidal Santiago. And he was furiously trying to get the attention of Greer. In fact, as the limo approached, that guy was in the street. He was standing in Elm Street. And there are a few still photographs where you can see that, in fact, he had stepped off the curb. And he was waving his arms. He finally signaled the driver with a closed fist, and this was clearly visible on this other film. And I'm told, I was in the Air Force, not the infantry, but I've been told that the closed fist signal is the infantryman's signal to stop. And it was quite apparent that when Greer saw the guy, he did exactly that. He stopped right there. He stopped on a dime. He stopped with such suddenness that it jostled the occupants of the limo. I mean, they were all thrown forward a bit as the limo came to a complete stop. Did not just slow down, it stopped. At that moment, Greer turned around with the limo stopped and he faced JFK. And as he did, the choreography of this is astounding. He turned around and he stared JFK in the face, and then you see JFK's head explodes from the frangible bullet. At that point, Greer turns back around and he proceeds to get out of Dealey Plaza, although I gotta say, there was no evidence in the film that he floored it. He just saw that JFK had been hit and he started the car. I don't know the specs on that car, how fast it can accelerate, but he did not, do a rabbit start out of Dealey Plaza. And he went forward, and the lead car, quite simply, was in his way, so he swerved to the left, and he passed the lead car and proceeded to get to Stemmons Freeway to get the president to Parkland Hospital. Now, the events that I just described took place almost as if they were choreographed. And since I and a half dozen other people that I know have seen that film, Len, there's no question in our mind as to whether the limo slowed or it stopped. It stopped. Now, I don't mean that it parked. I mean it stopped for possibly 2 to 3 seconds. But during that interval, JFK was hit by 2 headshots. One where you could noticeably see his head move forward a bit. That would have been a shot to the rear of his head. I would suspect it was probably a low-velocity shot just based on the movement of his head. And then, of course, the gory exploding shot from the right front. And then Greer got the limo out of Dealey Plaza. So it looked all very choreographed to me. But there's no question in our minds that the limo stopped. Now, there were a couple of frames in the extant Zapruder film. I don't remember which frame it was. I'm thinking it was 308, but I could be off, where Dr. Roderick Ryan, who worked for Kodak and was a consultant in the motion picture industry. In fact, when he retired, he got a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Oscars. He looked at the neighboring frames, and he was able to determine that the frames that showed the limo being blurred somewhat, the limo was in motion, and the one where the limo was in sharp focus, it was in sharp focus because the limo was standing still. I mean, we have even more evidence than just the other film that the limo had stopped. Now, I have to say that one would conclude from what you see between the limo reacting to somebody signaling it to stop and it stopping and so forth, that there was Secret Service complicity in the assassination. Of course, we know that agents were called off the limo and they did not take their their usual steps in protecting the car. But here we have both Greer and Kellerman aware somebody was approaching the car, and at that point I think that I would have floored it at that point, not knowing who that individual was, but instead Greer stopped the car, and President Kennedy's head was blown off. So, you have any questions up to now?
No,
Well,
okay,
I
go
just
ahead.
say, Rich, that I think your experience was quite extraordinary in having the opportunity to see the film on those various occasions. And it makes me wonder, who was responsible for providing those opportunities. It seems so unusual and so significant that it appears to me it had to have been done quite deliberately, though it's not obvious to me precisely to what effect, because so clearly it stuck with you and has made a huge difference once you actually saw the Zapruder film, that you could tell so readily that it was a very, very different film. But I'm kind of struck that this even occurred on that campus.
Well, I had heard that a version of the film was floating around various college campuses, so when the opportunity presented itself to see the film, I guess I wasn't surprised. Now, where that film came from and how it got in the hands of whomever was projecting it at these different colleges, I have no idea. But you actually see a different set of events from the Zapruder film. And one thing I'd point out is that since we do have the extant Zapruder film available to us in various forms of media, that most of us, most researchers have seen it so many times that we don't need the film or a projector or a computer to view it. We can just recall it by memory. And I also think that is somewhat deliberate. I used to refer to that as having that Zapruder film dangled in front of us and made easily accessible. And the fact of the matter is that whomever they are, they wanted us to see that film. They wanted us to memorize that film, and they wanted us arguing for decades whether the limo stopped or the limo didn't stop, and so forth. Now, an interesting sidebar to this is that the expanded Zapruder film, having been altered by a variety of techniques, like inserting extra frames or frame stretching, techniques such as that, people that have only seen the extant Zapruder film typically have the reaction when they go to Dealey Plaza of saying, "Oh my God, Dealey Plaza is so much smaller than I imagined." And, I assert that the reason for that is that if you watch the Zapruder film and you watch the infield grass where Mary Moorman and Gene Hill were standing, that the infield grass seems to go on longer than in reality because of all of the frame stretching that was employed in altering that film.